people of the multiverse, and welcome to the Infinity Podcast, the show that connects popular comics to pop culture with an infinite number of detours along the way. I am Rachel Gorgie Shank, the Natural.
I am Scott Thomas, the Hatted Wonder. I didn't know we were doing nicknames, and I went, oh, shoot.
Sometimes I just let the spirit move me, and I guess I'm the Natural now. Not really. I have no natural proclivities toward any physical activity, so...
Apologies to Dustin Rhodes, but you just Malachi Black-bodied him. That nickname is yours now.
It's mine now.
And listen, listeners, if you're wondering why the wrestling is coming up, I'm going to put it to you this way. Business has just picked up because today...
my gosh.
We're leaning in. In the wake of All Out, in the wake of a great Dynamite, in the wake of a great Rampage, and in the wake of very little in the way of definitive comic book MCU news. Like, there were 2 trailers for 2 video games. We are going to hit those on a later episode. We're going to get there. And there were the Marvel release dates for unknown projects. We're going to get there eventually, too.
Yeah, but we've got some known projects coming out of the AEW universe. Adam Cole, baby.
Brian Danielson, baby.
The American Dragon, baby. Ruby Soho, baby.
The Runaway.
Way.
And we actually thought it would be fun to look and see how AEW and how wrestling in general, pro wrestling in general, both already informs the Marvel Cinematic Universe, maybe the DC Universe as well, and what they can learn from one another if they can improve each other, to have that conversation and thought experiment. I will already tell you there were more overlaps than I thought when I pitched it. I think this is gonna get deep.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if anybody follows our Twitter, noticed a retweet that I made of CM Punk sharing an image of the Thing saying it's clobbering time. In the same way that I think punk rockers and wrestlers have a nice Venn diagram of fandom, I would say that superhero fans and wrestling fans have a very big Venn diagram as well. The aesthetics are very similar.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to dive into that. Before we do, we have to ask, Rachel, how are you?
Oh my gosh, I'm so good. I'm literally in a constant glow, pun not intended, with this advent of wrestling in my life.
Yes.
I'm picking up old stuff. I watched -1's little birthday situation.
Yeah.
I can't remember who yelled, "I'm gonna ruin your birthday." I love it. I love this so much, and I'm getting so excited to dig back into the archives and watch really cool moments. In my watch later, I've obviously got Thunder Rosa versus Nyla Rose, Dr. Britt Baker DMD versus Thunder Rosa.
Oh yes.
Are you kidding me? The blood.
All the blood. You can get that on a t-shirt. That t-shirt sold. That t-shirt was, I think, one of their highest sellers until CM Punk put his t-shirt out and started throwing ice cream bars at people. We love to see it.
Yeah, it's just, I'm glad that this is my hyperfixation right now, because it is a very joyful hyperfixation to have, and in the way of generating lots and lots of content, hashtag for a better term, you get Dark on Mondays, Dark Elevation Tuesdays, Dynamite, then Rampage on Fridays. This is a lot. There's a lot of matches and a lot of characters. It's almost oppressive to try and look at it and go, how do I get into this? But it has made itself so accessible that I was able to pick it up. And now I have opinions about Orange Cassidy saying, Matt Hardy wants to cut my hair. It's whatever.
Well, and I think actually that might be a good place to sort of take us into this conversation proper, that we're already starting, but going around, because you're asking yourself,
Wait, but how are you, Scott?
Oh my God, I'm so good. I got a new hat. It's the beginning of football season, which even if I have complicated feelings about the sport and the league, I have no complications about the joy the sport brings me having played it and getting to enjoy it with my friends and family. And I saw James Wan's *Malignant* yesterday, and it's the only thing I'm going to be thinking about for the next 4 months. I am begging every single listener out there to do one of two things. Either go watch this movie, because when I tell you it's the most deranged, most laugh-inducing, most squirm-inducing thing I've seen all year. I am not mincing words, and do not let anyone spoil for you why it is, because the trailers have hidden everything. But I'm also like pleading, let's say you don't want to see this movie. Please, if you have access to HBO Max and can stream it, just put it on a device, rotate that device away from your face, and let it stream. Because right now, this thing is doing very badly at the box office. And if we want more mid-budget movies made by auteur directors who decide to take the blank check they got from making a thing like Aquaman work and spend it on batshit insanity for adults from a major studio, we have to stream this. We have to go see it. So, like, just do what you do with Spotify, and you want to get a band's listens up. Just put it on, let it ride. Let it ride. Let's do this.
Play it for your pet.
Exactly. Just play it for your pet.
Ask your cat how they liked *Malignant*,
It's hey, actually a horror film with, I don't think it's spoilers to say, no violence inflicted upon the animal population.
Thank goodness.
Solid win for the animals. *Malignant* is. But also, after you've seen *Malignant*, just come into the DMs. It's a safe space. I know you're going to need to scream about it, and I'm here for you because, yeah. So I'm doing pretty great having given that PSA. And I'm great because this was a truly excellent week in All Elite Wrestling. Spoilers, by the way. And listen, listeners, I'll say this. Let's say wrestling isn't your thing. I hope by the end of this conversation, it is more your thing than it wasn't prior to it. We're going to try to make this inviting and user-friendly. And if you're somehow here more for the wrestling content than the superhero content in the last week or two, we hope to make superhero movies and pop culture and comics more your thing out of this. So we'll be doing our best to hold everyone's hand and make this a Venn diagram for all listeners, all people. But to invite everyone in, this was maybe the most mammoth week this company has ever had, and certainly one of the most mammoth weeks pro wrestling has had. By extension, All Out happened the day we recorded last week, the evening of. Rachel and I were texting the whole night.
Whole night, yeah. It's like, it was me screaming at the TV, then texting you, and also texting my other wrestling fan friend, Wally. So, it was full. What a night.
What a night. Wound up being the biggest pay-per-view in wrestling history, according to the numbers that got dropped. So, absolutely massive. Actually, we should start there. On a scale of 1 to 10 yeses, what would you rate All Out?
Infinite yeses.
Yeah.
Infinite yeses. Like, I was for a while a football fan.
Yeah.
Again, complicated feelings about football. And
hugely.
Like, so much of that energy of like watching bodies do things.
Yes.
Makes me yell. Makes me like get super like hype, and I cannot describe the number of times that I was screaming and gasping and crying. Like, yes. I am now so emotionally connected to the Lucha Bros that whenever they did the interview after the event and a kid asked, do you get scared when you do what you do? And I mean, obviously, spoilers for All Out, like the cage match where like Ray Phoenix is jumping off the top of the cage is absolutely like gut-wrenchingly exciting and terrifying. But like to hear Penta say, this mask makes me a superhero, I was like, we have to connect these dots because this is absolutely like Lucha is similar to like masked superhero-dom, you know, like as little as I know Lucha, obviously a white Midwestern person, you know, like I'm not indoctrinated into that, but like with the passion that Penta said this to someone, I was crying because I was like, that's the connection that you can have to your persona and what it can do for other people.
Yes.
Amazing. Oh my gosh, I'm so proud.
I think there's even an argument to be made that match, very specifically, and the lucha component makes it more classically superhero-ish than what we've arrived at in your MCU or DC universe. Because, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, in Marvel, secret identities really don't matter so much right now. At least on the big screen. That is a trope from the older time of comic books and from the older iterations of these films that we're blowing the hinges off of frequently in the MCU. I think I saw a tweet the other week going, so does anyone in the Marvel universe have a secret identity anymore?
No,
they don't really.
The MCU has lost its kayfabe.
Yes.
For everyone.
For everyone.
There's no kayfabe.
Correct. And so when you have a story beat in the cage match, like the Young Bucks going for Penta and Rey's masks, you really are plugging into an older archetype of classic superhero versus villain stuff, or heel versus babyface stuff in the parlance of wrestling. And then I think the other point that gets brought up by that match is, and I think it's true of football too, it's there are languages that we understand, and I usually think they're physical, but physical connected to the barest modicum of storytelling, right? You don't have to plug into the NFL to know, oh, this team versus this team. You don't have to know superhero comics to jump into Endgame and understand the stakes of what's happening. And you certainly don't have to be so versed in wrestling to know all of the Young Bucks and the Lucha Brothers matches to plug in and feel something because of the marriage of physical action and archetypal story details, right?
Yeah, and also I would say that wrestling is given an even greater boon because it has live audience reaction. Like,
yes.
No one had to tell me that MJF was terrible. you just had to have MJF come out and just hear Tony Schiavone go, "Look at that shirt." And it's like, "Oh, that's a bad guy. Got it. Yeah, he stings." I didn't need to hear him like shit all over Cincinnati with his garbage mouth. Like, you just get it right away, It's incredibly emotionally accessible like that.
Yes, absolutely. And the pay-per-view was really, really accessible. It was somehow a culmination of everything they'd done up until this point, and a perfect entry point, which is what most pay-per-views are supposed to be. But this one, between introducing someone like Ruby Soho, who represents an entirely different aesthetic strain of women's wrestler than the company has had up until this point, and bringing in these big WWE guys who are now conceivably get to flourish in very different ways here. It was sort of that perfect entry point in. And obviously $50 is a big ask, but if you happen to have it lying around or happen to know the right internet link, go.
Or you have a Bleacher Report friend. I'm looking at you, Wale.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Find your Bleacher Report friends. They probably watch other sports because they got Bleacher Report, and see if you can get access to this, because it really is. This has been a weird summer for pop culture in every way, not just in film, kind of identifying genuine flashpoint moments. Shang-Chi, genuine flashpoint moment. Fast 9, genuine flashpoint moment. Doja Cat, pretty much a flashpoint moment. The Halsey record, but
the Halsey record.
The Halsey record for sure, but fewer and farther in between than we've had, and that's understandable given where the world is. The way this took over not just my social media timeline, but the general trending, made me realize this also very close to one of those A-tier flashpoint moments, I think.
Yeah, like if Infinity War and Endgame were the all-out of superhero
yes.
Like that same energy, like just in terms of like me screaming and crying, like they both have like rendered themselves so emotionally important to me, and like I can't believe that AEW did for my heart what the MCU took a decade plus to do for my heart. You know, that I watched 2 weeks of Dynamite and then this All Out, and I'm just like, I'm so keyed in this wild way. And I think that, like, there's an efficiency of storytelling that that AEW, and I'd say like pro wrestling as a whole, is doing so much better than superhero movies. And I think it is because it is more serialized. Like, I don't have to know every single second of what's going on with the Dark Order to know in their promos that they're essentially imploding, you know?
Right,
like,
yes.
They're having some family trauma, you know? Like, there's some trouble cooking in the world of Dark Order, you know? Like, they're literally fighting each other on Dark, and the audience is like, please don't fight, and that's amazing. And I think that what pro wrestling, especially through AEW, is doing is serializing its drama and bringing about more satisfying third act conclusions than our friends in the MCU, you know? Like, it is absolutely thrilling, and I think it is because it is bodies doing choreography. It is checking in with different characters throughout, or like that weird like shark jets like Broadway run-in, and you're just like, uh-oh, Jungle Express is here to help defend, you know, and then like everybody scatters. It's very theatrical, and I really hope that with MCU television sort of taking this spotlight of breaking down more character-focused arcs, we might get that sense into the MCU and like DC entertainment.
It's a really interesting point, because I think pro wrestling has the advantage going in. Like, in some way, the MCU is playing with a handicap, or even DC. There's much more crossover with Marvel, though, and I have a theory as to why, and it's not just the serialization, but both would be playing with a handicap where this next thing is concerned, which is the idea that in wrestling, the floor and ceiling for how much money you need to spend to achieve stakes is so much lower. Like, all wrestling set pieces, by and large, are ostensibly the same. It's the ornamentation around them that costs or doesn't cost money. And what people expect from any given quote-unquote set piece in wrestling is pretty much something you can deliver solely with the bodies, right? You don't have to put almost anything around it. And when you are telling a narrative story that's supposed to go over 6 episodes, or has to build out a world with details that doesn't exist in, you know, a ring, there's more that has to be laid, a certain amount of groundwork. But I think one of the points you're making is maybe not as much as they often think. That in fact, sometimes it gets dressed up too much. And one of the things that I was thinking coming into this conversation that backs up your thought is, how could AEW improve the MCU, DCU, or vice versa? And it is that, like, I would like them to find the equivalent of their Rampage, right? Their program, which is ostensibly an hour where we understand the frills don't have to be there. If Dynamite is where we're going to go for 2 hours, and we will have the promos that expand the world and give the local flavor of Cincinnati. If we're going to have a squash match that gets us a little bit farther in a story, like Powerhouse Hobbs and Dante Martin, but doesn't really deliver like the full goods, that's great. That's fine. That's more like an extended MCU series. But then you can also have the one that's sort of like just shoving the distilled best of this into your heart, the way the needle was in Pulp Fiction, right? You're just like throwing it in. Like, that's what Rampage is now.
Yeah.
This week, pay-per-view quality matches in about an hour. My partner, not a huge wrestling fan, but I was putting it on both for the podcast and myself. And Rampage was so streamlined that she plugged right in instantly. Like, had reactions, was following, had questions to ask, because there's nothing you have to do but look at that program, like you said, to get a sense of what's going on. Marvel is absolutely at the point where they can have that. What If is almost that. It's almost that. It's not quite, because it requires a little bit too much in terms of thought exercise, but it's close. in terms of kind of delivering everything the movie gives you in a 35-minute span.
Yeah, I'd agree. I especially love coming at this on the heels of What If Zombies, because like could there have been more of an epitome of a heel turn of your MCU characters than they're flesh-eating zombies now?
That's
you
right.
know? Like, wow. Kismet, one could say.
We're going to be getting into that episode too, because
Oh
boy.
boy.
What a viewing experience.
Yeah, and I think that's why Shang-Chi rang so beautifully as a piece and really like can get you hype for the genre of martial arts films, because again, it is bodies in motion doing things, and like yes, it does sort of break away at the end with like dragons and stuff, but like throughout it, like you have conversations about like which fight was better, the bus fight or the scaffolding fight.
Yeah.
And both of those are just so predicated on really talented movers.
Yeah.
Safely making it look dangerous.
Yes.
You know?
100%. And then it's actually predicated on one other thing too that I wanted to get your take on, which is I was trying to think of like what is a thing that links these two things together in a massive way. And one of the ones I arrived at really surprised me, which was that basically Marvel's post-credit scenes are the equivalent of wrestling's pops, right? You set up a pay-per-view such that you are expecting someone to show up. You know it's not over until the thing that you have to watch next week, and very specifically the person that's going to get introduced into this world, shows up and you lose your proverbial shit.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I screamed so loud when Kenny Omega at All Out was about to say good night, and then did and then all of a sudden like Born for Greatness starts playing. Like,
yeah,
I was up on my fucking feet.
Yes,
just throwing my arms up.
Yeah.
Ugh,
it was unbelievable. Even before,
it was unreal. Even though I knew.
Sure.
Like, everybody knew.
Yeah. Well, I was texting with my friend. We're like, so Adam Cole's showing up, right? And when the lights went out and the theme started, single tear falling from my face. So good to see him there, looking happy. But that's also every single Marvel movie. We stick around to catch a pop of some kind, right? In even a movie like Shang-Chi that has post-credit scenes that if they don't necessarily introduce a new character, introduce new concepts, you still catch a pop when Trevor Slattery is on the screen. You catch a pop when someone else from the world shows up and you're going, oh man, they're going to do this? They're going to do Y? Like, we were talking about how Wong won last week, and it's because in wrestling terms, he's basically in a program with all the, like, fast rising members of the MCU. Like,
yeah, he's Orange Cassidy actually like losing his shit to yell at Chris Statlander.
He is 10,000% the Orange Cassidy of the MCU right now.
Yep.
That's right. Because he should feel overexposed, but he doesn't, because what he's actually able to do through his very specific gimmick is transition seamlessly, not just from world to world, but extreme to extreme. You are ready to expect that Orange Cassidy will scream at Chris Statlander just as much as you are that Riho will throw him her coat and it will just fall to the ground because he does not catch it. Wong will be very, very serious, and Wong will also be doing karaoke with Shang and Katie at like 3 a.m.
You know, like being serious about the art form, but not being so self-serious. You know? Yes. I think that's what's really fun about a wrestler like Orange Cassidy, who's like an incredible wrestler. Like, just the technical marvel of being able to do those like flying moves with your hands in your pockets, Spike Spiegel style. Like, absolutely incredible, but such a strong character to be completely unfazed, like a not fully like erect thumbs up, you know? Just like this very like low key ness that's just, you know, because everybody else is like pitched up to 1,000,000, like, I'm the best in the world. I'm the natural. I'm from a graveyard in Tijuana, and then just this guy in like leisure denim. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
And then to your point though, that's another way that it's both similar to superhero stuff and a way that I think especially Marvel, but either one could be improved. Either one being Marvel or DC. Like we are at the point in Marvel now where on paper at least it does look like you have your Orange Cassidys and your Pox. It looks like you have your Britt Baker DMDs and your Chris Statlanders. There's room for aliens, brawlers, snarky wise asses, dentists, right? Every single character has a place here. Mm-hmm. But they're all beholden of the baseline of the universe they're in, right? Inevitably, Orange Cassidy, no matter how different he is from wrestling, returns to wrestling. And one of the most frequent complaints about Marvel movies is, even if it seems like this is different, eventually it becomes a Marvel movie. Like watching AEW makes me realize that the complaint is a double-edged sword, because ultimately Marvel gonna Marvel, and that's a great thing. What we actually talk about when we say that is wanting whatever the Marvel gonna Marvel is to be just slightly more elevated than it is now. Mm-hmm. Like we actually want the variation around the form to hit the thing that defines all these things, and for that to soar more. Because ultimately, when pro wrestling is returning to that form, if the return works, we lose our proverbial shit again.
Yeah. And I think that AEW teaches us a really interesting lesson in variance being completely pleasing to so many.
Yes.
I think the MCU has often fallen into a terrible, repetition of snarky X with parent issues.
Sure, yes.
Doing Y. It is kind of like, oh, our first villain ever is going to be an evil doppelganger version of our hero,
right.
And really doing that consistently again and again and again. But and I imagine the reasoning being we're trying to please the largest common swath of humanity, but AEW is very pleasing to a great many, and it has really varied archetypes, not just varied archetypes, but varied bodies and ages. The fact that CM Punk is sitting down in an interview saying that Sting, him, and Darby Allin being in the ring together is multi-generational.
Yeah.
And that amount of just we're gonna do different body types, different fighting styles, literally different nationalities, all arriving here. It's really cool to see that, because we're kind of getting the same archetype again and again in the MCU, and only now are we starting to go, okay, but what about the women of the MCU? What about different nationalities, different traditions coming to roost,
What about the style of humor, as we were discussing last week? What is it when Awkwafina sets the tone and it isn't sort of the same specific kind of pop culture banter snark? To your point, actually, about the ages, this is something I hope that both DC and Marvel pick up, because DC is actually now positioned to be the first one to do the thing I'm about to describe. This company, much more than WWE, has been very graceful about how it reincorporates its legends, both honoring their deep legend status, right? There is a reverence for Sting and CM Punk that you feel the second they show up. However, they are finding new programs, right? Once they're there, they're not spinning their wheels. And some of why they had to take time has to do with the physical element, right? Sting probably shouldn't be doing much in a ring besides the lightest of falls, given his history. Yeah, exactly. Punk is trying to figure out what kind of physical condition he's in to decide what kind of matches he can do. But I was thinking, watching All Out, okay, eventually we're going to hit a point in Marvel where we want to deal with an older Thor coming back. where we want to have maybe, I don't know, let's say Anthony Mackie steps away for a bit, shows back up as an older Sam Wilson. In DC, the Flash movie is predicating itself on how effective or no Michael Keaton returning to the mantle of Bruce Wayne is going to be. Mm-hmm. And I do wonder if there would be something for either of these universes to gain, not just from sort of trotting out the heroes for one last score, but what creating an extended program for them would look like. Because I've been quietly stunned at just how successful that's been in AEW.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be really interesting. Especially because, like, yes, time is a lake, but we perceive it in a linear fashion.
Yes.
And, you know, unlike animated or drawn characters, like, Mark Ruffalo is getting older, you know, like, and getting to see him, like, de-hulkified and not de-aged was really refreshing, you know. It was like, yes, time is marching on. And I think it's fine that we let these characters grow and age, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think step in and step out of the narrative, right? There's something, in a weird way, you almost want the Marvel Cinematic Universe to just be a little bit bigger already, which seems insane given that it's too big. But what happens is that we're kind of jumping in and around the same central plot point. It's almost more like, this is not a great metaphor, like the movies are the sun, right? And the other shows are revolving around them, and we somehow understand that there is still a central planet, a central thing that is dictating the way everything is spinning. Whereas really what kind of happens in wrestling is at any given moment, one of those planets can become the center, right? You don't really know whose program is going to take charge, and they ebb and flow. And a guy like Lance Archer is kind of doing stuff on Dark now, and Brian Pillman Jr. was absolutely just doing squash matches, and he's on his way up as of this week. And I'm sure that he will not be, just relegated to the big leagues. He'll go back down. It's all in and out. And there's that sense that anything is possible that is not missing from the actual comic racks themselves, right? Like, sure, there are big event crossovers, but you never know in the comic books who's going to suddenly take a bigger swing or who's going to have their shot. That's where the crossover between wrestling and the comic world is a little bit closer in print than it is on film.
Yeah. And it's to your point, like, mentioning sort of like the ever rotating echelon of like who's leading the charge in pro wrestling. Like, I think it's really fascinating that, like, in the Statlander Britt Baker match, that Britt Baker retained the title, and got to hold on to that because we're bringing in a Ruby Soho.
Yes.
And we're gonna give that, like, some life and some breath and let Ruby sort of lead the charge. And then the week after her arrival, like, she's tag teaming with Statlander and Riho, a former women's world champion.
Yeah.
And, like, Riho is really taking a support role in this, to, like, bolster Ruby. It's really, really cool. Also, that entire tag team fight was transcendent. Just
fantastic.
Please use Riho as a weapon forever.
Yeah.
Like, ugh.
She's perfect. No notes about Riho.
No notes at all.
Are there any notes you would give AEW or professional wrestling from the MCU? Is there one way where this goes back around and it's not just AEW improving the MCU? I have one if you haven't thought of one yet.
Yeah, you please do yours. I'll think of mine. I'm just really like A+ no notes AEW right now, so it's difficult for me to find fault, but I'll think on it. I'm in. Okay, I got one. But you go first.
The low-key note I would give it is promo school, which is to say that I think the thing that Marvel has actually done better than just about any institution on the planet, even Hollywood itself to a certain extent, is realizing that there are different types of movie stars, and if you're going to throw them under the same banner, you have to figure out how to make them all make sense under that banner. So if everyone in a Marvel movie has to have the potential to be funny, and a certain kind of funny, as an example, right? Because there are the majority of characters in Marvel who are more banter ready than not. It's probably like an 85 to 15% ratio. Then you have to own that each one of them is going to have to do that differently, even as it feels the same. No one has tried to make Sebastian Stan be Robert Downey Jr., but they have had to figure out what the funniest version of Sebastian Stan is. I think a little bit in AEW and in wrestling in general, people are expected to give certain kinds of promos. And if you can't cut that kind of promo, then you're not really ready for the big leagues. Orange Cassidy being a notable exception. Yeah. But if you're not fully off in like character that defies promo land, then you've got to be a really good talker. I think if this league is going to keep pushing itself forward, finding a way to give a guy like Powerhouse Hobbs, as an example, who amazing in the ring, huge presence, based on everything I'm seeing, doesn't seem like he's very comfortable on the mic. Brian Cage is another guy who was part of Team Taz who just this week was complaining about his usage, and the blowback was, we'll get better at cutting a promo, and we'll talk. And on one level, that's valid. And on another, I wonder if it would be possible to give him, say, like what Dave Bautista is able to do in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Can you weaponize Brian Cage in a way that makes his on-mic stuff more effective and just a little more outside of the box than it has been up until this point? I think Marvel has found very clever ways to get outside of the box with certain performers without ever having it seem like they're doing so.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually really valid because, like, yeah, as fun as it is to hear the promo of my competitor, like, it's very anime. Like, my competitor is one of the best, and when I beat them, it will be, I am the best also, you know, like, very much that. And, like, you sort of get that sort of same dynamic. Now you're making me think of My Hero Academia, like the most recent UA arc where they're doing sort of like battle tests against each other, like, so Class 1A and Class 1B, like, they're doing team ups and they're fighting, you know, to show their skills and how they're leveling up and stuff. And, like, it's very similar, like, oh, this person has a lot of these skills and like this and this and this, but I really need to beat them. The school festival arc is also a really good example of that. Like, My Hero's sports festival is absolutely wrestling. Yeah. You know, like 100%. That same energy. And yeah, no, I get that. Very, you know, like, I think that the MCU does play with these characters in a space a lot more effectively. Like, when you have all of a sudden, like, Hope Van Dyne having a heart-to-heart with Peter Parker about the nature of, like, holding on and smiling for those who can't, you know, is a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, palpable and cohesive than, you know, the sort of, like, implosion of the Dark Order. That's a little messy, and I think that's because there's a lot more improv that's going on
100%
with the wrestlers and their banter and stuff. You know, you can sort of, like, catch little, like, breaks and mistakes every once in a while, you know, not a lot, but, like, I think because, like, we are scripting the improv a lot more in the MCU, you're gonna have a lot more nuance to your character beats.
And to your point, not only are we scripting the improv more, we have more time before we get to set and we have to deal with improv or not, right? Like, wrestlers have almost zero time, especially when you are taping 4 shows a week over how many days. And we forget sometimes that, like, I mean, no matter how incredible any of the actors are in the MCU, and they are all absolutely top tier, they also train for months. Like, they train for months, and they have months of time to think about a thing or to work on a thing. It's
afforded the opportunity of multiple takes because
exactly
what they are doing is not live. Like, Meryl Streep doesn't give Meryl Streep performances every single take. I imagine she gives that a lot of them, but on set, I'm sure Meryl Streep flubs her lines.
Because we tangent, and we are known
we
to.
Tangent.
We tangent. Have I ever told you my story about friend of the podcast Ben Rappaport working with Meryl Streep?
Maybe, but tell me again.
Listeners, this is Ben's story. I cannot confirm it is entirely true. You're getting it from a third-person party. But Ben plays Meryl Streep's son in Hope Floats. He was very excited to work with Meryl. And he was wondering, like, okay, so is Meryl going to be, like, very serious? Is she going to be loose? Is she going to be fun? It's what you're always wondering when you get on set and you meet an actor for the first time. And they said hi to each other as they're getting ready to shoot this dinner table scene. I think it's him, Mayron Ireland, Patch Dara, and Tommy Lee Jones. And they're doing Tommy's close-ups. And again, not much interaction between Ben and Meryl up until this point. And Tommy's talking to Ben in this scene. And Ben says, suddenly, on his right-hand side is Meryl Streep. And Meryl Streep just looks at him and goes, huh, look at your father. Wow, looks like he's retiring, huh? I wonder what his life is going to be like after this moment. I'm so sad. I'm so worried about him. And 3, 2, 1. And Ben's like, what the fuck? And then suddenly they're doing the scene. And Meryl had just like acting coached him into the moment like some sort of ninja that appeared and dropped stakes into the middle of the conversation. And that is how I want to believe Meryl Streep is. Every time, always, alwhere, no matter the project.
Yeah, because like Meryl's take before the take, that's the pro wrestling. Like,
yes,
that's what it is.
100%.
Like,
yes,
absolutely an explanation of this is how I feel, and like that feeling carries into what your body's gonna do in the fight.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, that's it. There it is. Like, it is absolutely Bryan Danielson sitting in an interview, building heat for himself and the others by being like, I'm a really good wrestler.
Yeah.
And I think that all of these wrestlers are really good, but I want to know. That's Meryl Streep going, your father's retiring.
Yeah.
What's his life going to be like? She was literally building heat. I love that.
Yes.
Oh,
and,
I am in.
And holy shit, I never would have thought about it, but that's the other major thing that these companies have in common with pro wrestling and the audiences have in common, which is we are at the point now as MCU fans, as DCU fans, as wrestling fans, where we are able to recognize the difference between cheap heat and real heat, and we are not shy about saying when one is cheap and one is straight fire. You know what I mean? Like, that is a language that people have not had in extended cinema that is now very regularly what we basically do when we get any new piece of content. We cry foul or we go, yo, that rocks, you did that right. Like, we are the adjudicators of the heat and how hot it is.
We're professional marks at this point.
Yes,
Like,
we are so good. Yes, you're so right.
Marks with a penchant of understanding our own place as marks.
Yes.
Like, there we are.
Yes.
We can feel when you have touched on what makes us marks in a great way. I think that the bus fight in Shang-Chi is that stroking of like, this is what makes me happy to be a mark, versus like the dragon sequence at the end where it's just like we've lost all of the emotionality because like the big bad of this entire piece, the father, is gone, and now it's kind of hollow, and that like rubs that the wrong way. It's like the opposite feeling of like, I don't wish to be emotionally invested in this because you didn't earn it.
Right. Right. It was the equivalent of when the Paul White and QT Marshall match happened. It wasn't that it was objectively bad. It just, the dramatic thrust has been lost from this, and I'm no longer as invested, and I'll be invested again when you give me a reason to pop. And
when you give me MJF standing in Cincinnati and Brian Pillman Jr. comes out and is like, what, why are you yelling at Aunt Linda? You suck. Like, you just get it. Like, that's that pleasure center of, like, we've all agreed that this is absolutely important. And I'm really happy to believe it, you know.
And I think
MJF
this is
yelling at Aunt Linda.
MJF yelling at anyone. That dude, I'm going to be real. Of all the people that I actually want to act with in AEW, MJF at the top of the list. I think that dude, whenever he pivots into acting, is gonna knock some people's faces off. I think he's really good. I think he's actually quite good.
Completely understands the assignment, and I think that's what makes it so easy for everyone, the audience, the announcers, anyone he's fighting, you know, to really like key into that, because he's giving you that Meryl heat. Without you asking. He's ninjaing his way into your emotions by just, like, owning his shtick, fully committing to this idea that he is better than you, and you are garbage. Like, it is beautiful to behold.
I completely agree with you. Can I throw one last insane take at you before we touch in on What If? Because this has not been workshopped. This may be like going for a moonsault and there's no one there to land on. Would our lives as fans of these movies be better if we admitted that we're marks? Because what is the cinema versus not cinema discussion around this stuff, if not basically saying, no, we're not marks, we're actually X or Y? Because, like, in pro wrestling, you understand that being in love with this, wanting to be manipulated by the exact mechanics of this property is part of your assignment as a viewer. And if you're buying in, that's part of the joy of buying in. That's part of why you watch every single week. You give over to that idea. And when someone tries to come at you with a thing about what pro wrestling is, like, example, if someone said, like, to you, pro wrestling isn't football, you'd be like, hell no, of course it's not. It's nowhere near, like, football. And that's great. That's absolutely fantastic. Like, if we actually were willing to admit to ourselves that, like, part of being a Marvel is being a mark for Marvel and living in the contained universe of what it does, then we wouldn't get so wrapped up in this same debate over and over and over again.
It's true. And I can actually bring in the other sport that I love to witness. I'm talking Jill's marble runs.
Nice.
Here it is. Here she comes, rolling in. Literally.
Tie it all together.
We just finished Marble League 2021.
Nice.
And the final event was a sort of like a circuit race.
Okay.
And the way they had ordered the marbles was reverse order of victor. So, like, the top two teams were in the last slot. And I'm going to break my own kayfabe and I'm going to stop being a mark for a second. Yeah. Because marbles are marbles and gravity works and physics go.
Whoa.
The two teams that were in the top didn't finish well because they didn't start well. Like, literally, that's how marbles work. Ugh. Like, I'm sorry to say this, but let's come back and, like, watching the comments of people being like, this was really, like, you did these two marbles dirty, like, because of how you placed them on the starting line. And then someone just, like, came into the comments and was like, no, Mellow Yellow just wanted it more. This yellow marble that won just obviously had more in the tank for it. And it's just like, if you can have a full celebration of your own markdom,
yes,
when you look at marbles rolling on, like, gravitracks,
yes,
I think you can suspend your, like, disbelief for whether or not Stephen Strange is gonna alter time to help Peter Parker. You know, I think you can. I think you're absolutely right, because it's more fun to allow yourself to be a mark than not, because instead of being angry that your marbles were put in the back of the pack and they lost, you're angry because, like, the Rangers came to play today. You know,
Yeah.
like, we want to infuse emotionality on things. We want to do that. And I think we're getting in our own way with the assignment when we just don't give ourselves over.
Yeah.
You know, on a story level, obviously, like, corporations bad. Like, we could really go for days about, like, how the other wrestling company has a similar track to the conglomerate of Disney. Like, they ate up a bunch of
100%.
smaller organizations to the detriment of the art form and to the performers within. Like, obviously, like, that goes without saying. But I think when we are just as audience members buying into the fiction, it makes it exciting and more worth your time.
100%. And the thing I'll add to that too is that, like, you can be critical as a mark, but I think it's the lack of elevating your criticism that's the difference, right? Mm-hmm. Like, no one's saying don't judge these things at all, don't have opinions, don't have thoughts, but that remove of, like, the thought, the criticism about this thing is better than the thing, or is a reason for me not to enjoy it as much as I do. Because I think, like, there's something about a lot of wrestling fandom where, at least with where AEW seems to be, when you are critical of it, when you are praising it, in no way is it taking away from the notion of whether you should or shouldn't love it. And the Marvel movies are cinema or they're not. One of the insidious underliers is, if they're not, maybe you shouldn't love them as much. And no one is saying that, and I think that's where I'm interested in, like, the mark mentality being useful. By extension, to make sure we hit the other thing on our docket before we get out of here, I think Marvel gave people a reason to mark out if they wanted this week by giving them a thing that I never thought we were going to see in the MCU proper, which was Marvel Zombies.
Zombies.
The infamously popular Marvel Zombies showing up in What If. We did it.
Just everyone is a zombie. And also to obviously now spoilers for What If Zombies.
Yes.
Because now we're really getting into it.
Yeah.
Vision having a real heel turn and a face turn. Here we go.
Can you believe we've seen Vision die 3 times this year? We've seen Vision die 3 times in the calendar year. We got him in What If.
Yep.
We got him in WandaVision.
Mm-hmm.
And we got him a second time in WandaVision, right? Because we have the disappearing of his body and we have his actual disembodied corpse. So I guess we didn't see it. We've seen 3 different dead iterations of Vision. Yep. And then we've seen him die a total of 3 times in the MCU. This is nuts.
Yeah. Vision, poor Vision. Born to die, Vision.
Yeah.
Sweet Vision.
Yeah, Loki, born not to succeed. Vision, in the words of Bruce... born to die isn't Bruce Springsteen. That's born to run. It's about to be in the words of Bruce Springsteen. Baby, we were born to die. No, that doesn't feel quite right.
Vision has a lot of time to die, Billie Eilish.
What did you think?
There's so much time to die.
They just revealed that the runtime of that movie is 2 hours and 43 minutes. That's a ton of time. That's a ton of time.
Too much time.
By extension, Venom, Let There Be Carnage, minor news, its runtime released a cool 90 minutes. That is...
perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect amount. Thank you.
I thought I was excited for the movie, and now... I'm hype.
Get that carnage in a tight 90.
Let there be just enough carnage. Just enough.
That aloof amount of carnage that leaves you wanting more.
That's right. I don't want to be stuffed with carnage. I want to go back to the Venom restaurant and catch a little more carnage when I'm ready. Let's do this.
I want this to be the tapas of carnage.
I'm just imagining Venom ordering tapas now and just being like, do you have bacon dots? No! We specifically wanted bacon wrap dates.
Which are delicious.
They're delicious. Yeah, best tapas by a mile.
But, you know, what else was delicious? The flesh of our Marvel heroes through the lens of zombies.
What did you make? What did you make of this episode where flesh got eaten?
again, not to keep bringing pro wrestling back, but this was one of those episodes where I was really, like, keyed in and emotionally invested to the point that I shouted at this episode, "Don't you hurt my baby boy!"
Yeah.
Don't you hurt my baby boy, Peter. Don't you hurt him. I was incredibly worried the whole time for Peter. Because I love him.
This is an episode that reminds me that when we've had that criticism about Marvel kind of dabbling in a genre but not going full tilt, What If is more the exception to the rule than anything has been up until this point. Even if I think the balance of horror movie to not was a little off in this episode, it's not because the episode doesn't go full horror movie. Like, I was asking myself as I watched it, is this episode of Marvel Zombies like a good zombie movie? And again, I had a mixed reaction on that. But I would actually say it is a zombie movie in microcosm. Yeah. It truly is the thing. And when it is doing it well, it's doing it as well as almost anything I've seen all year.
Yeah, not to pull in another, like, property, but I would say that this episode of What If Zombies is a good episode of The Walking Dead.
Yes.
And that's not saying much, because The Walking Dead is not great.
And hasn't been for a long time.
But I definitely think that early season Walking Dead has this same energy.
Yeah.
But through a much more, like, optimistic lens, you know, like, whereas The Walking Dead is, yes, there are a lot of walkers, but the real threat is other people.
Yeah.
You know, this is, there are zombies, and, like, a robot's gonna be the scariest thing you're gonna see.
Yeah.
You know, but, like, even that scary thing that you see is through this deep lens of love for someone else, you know? It is not just Vision wantingly bashing your head in with a barbed wire covered bat. He's feeding you to the woman he loves, but not entirely. Like, he'll just take your leg.
Yeah.
Like, you get to live, but
you're just gonna take a piece of you.
Sorry about your leg.
Well, and this one for me, like you're saying, like, there is the theme of the episode, right? Can little gestures of love survive when everything else is gone? Is it possible for Peter to still smile for his fellow heroes, for everybody else, when he watches unimaginable death and destruction happen in front of him? Do Vision's little gestures of love still matter in a world where zombies are being overrun? I think the themes aren't as like airtight as they are in our Doctor Strange episode, in our Star-Lord episode, but they are there, and they're palpably felt. And I was kind of stunned at how moving I felt everything with Hope Van Dyne was. And how interesting it is that Hope Van Dyne has been one of the keyest cogs in this entire series to date, when you look at her being the reveal of episode 3, and now, like, kind of the emotional anchor of this zombie one. Really awesome stuff. Evangeline Lilly goes above and beyond. Crushes her outing this go-around. Really good voice work all around this go-around from
this one was
from
really
everybody.
Strongly voice acted. It finally hit that point where I'm like, no, I can see the life in these characters. Like, I've had some issues with the way the animation has looked.
Yeah.
This one, I think, really, because the voice acting was so strong, like, everyone's face was so real to me that I almost imagine it in real life.
Yeah.
You know, like, I see Mark Ruffalo's face making these sounds with his mouth, you know, like, I can just, like, they're so connected and keyed in. So, like, good job on the voice direction for this one.
It's also a testament to, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, but it always bears repeating, like, anchoring your scenes in real places. It's not that the made-up ones are less effective, but there is something potent about watching that battle in Grand Central in this episode, the same way that first battle for New York is around so many landmarks. It does serve as a counterpoint to the fantastical in a way that I think energizes your, no, this could really be happening. And Grand Central looks majestic, haunting, everything in this episode. It's really, it's beautifully put together.
that's the scene where I shouted, "Don't you hurt my boy."
Yeah.
Because, like, the danger was so real of, like, getting the train to go. Like, I was such a mark in this one, and I couldn't help myself. Also, I'm such a sucker for, like, zombie properties. I love what zombies do to the stakes of any environment, of just, like, this idea that there is an army that will not rest, will not stop, and you cannot beat it because you will become it when you fall. You know, like, Hope, the giant Hope just, like, grabbing the Quinjet, just that idea of, like, your self-sacrifice now makes you a threat. It's so interesting. I love zombie stuff.
I 100% agree. My only other, like, complaint to offer as, like, a talking point is really one that I'm not even sure is a complaint, because what I kept thinking as I watched this is, would this episode have been a little darker or a little less reliant on humor as a counterbalance had we not just had the Doctor Strange episode? Because I found, like, I actually understood. I thought, like, I see why, both in a vacuum and over the course of a season, you need to vacillate so hard between glibness and darkness. Because there's some of the darkest stuff that has been in any Marvel episode, not only of this show, but of any Marvel thing, period, in this episode. And coming off the Doctor Strange one, which was one of the most devastating things they've ever done, that is a lot back to back and a lot to ask of an animated show on Disney Plus. And so I get how you might have to go, let's really lean into humor as a counterbalance here. But I did have moments where I was like, it almost felt like we were scared to be in a full zombie world. And so we're bouncing back to the humor kind of to appease the fact that we're on a streaming service. But I also don't know if that's a criticism, because in terms of season-long construction, like I said, it would feel too much if you were watching all of these back to back and you went from the Doctor Strange episode to this and that wasn't there. So
also,
I'm really
like,
of two minds about
Doctor
it.
Strange episode is on the heels of the
murder mystery.
Yeah, so, like, we've plunged deep into the darkness, you know, like, we're already there. But I think that levity as the counterpoint of making this an episode of The Walking Dead, but we have hope. Literally, like, we have hope. I think is necessary, because I don't want this show to resort to nihilism.
Absolutely.
You know, I think it really does need, even in that last second of, like, zombie Thanos, like, oh, well, I guess all of this was for naught. Cause fuck, I guess. I think it just needed that. In the same way that I think that the Doctor Strange episode kind of needed that very morbid sort of, like, Groundhog Day loop. I don't want to call that humorous, but
no, I understand exactly what you mean.
It is wearing the trappings of the rhythm of humor.
No, I think I have my fix for it. This would be an A+ episode for me if it's not Happy who's stuck demonstrating everything in the video. It's Hope, because then it literally winds up being about that core conflict that Hope brings up. How can you stay so bright? How can you stay this way? Because Hope does not have that until the mid-ed point of the episode, and then Peter really gives that to her. Mm-hmm. And I think if you make that the core driving idea, then oh boy, there it is. Like, there's all the justification. But I think you're right. Hearing you talk about it, I went, oh yeah, that is why that's there. And we could have tightened that up a little bit, but it's another installment of the show where I'm like, I'm so glad I'm choosing to watch this every week and thrilled by what they're doing. Like, these are nitpicks for a show that is continuing to deliver such a high level of competency and emotional moments every week. It's just good stuff.
Yeah, it's really, really fun, and I'm really looking forward to how this all wraps up, because like obviously like this isn't just the stories of the multiverse. This is the story of the Watcher.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm really excited based on like how the Watcher came forth near the tail end of the Doctor Strange episode.
Yeah.
To once again sort of return to, no, I am merely the Watcher. I cannot get involved. I will not get involved. You know, like I think that there's so much going on in the subtext of this through being the Watcher as our protagonist.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So it'll be really interesting to see how that all falls out and what it all means going onward, you know.
And we are going to be finding that out week in and week out with y'all, but for now, we gotta get out of here. We got stuff that we gotta go. We gotta go. We gotta do our stuff.
I've got archives to watch.
Yeah, it's football Sunday. I gotta watch my Bears lose. It's important. It'll this week. It'll happen. The Justin Fields experience is coming, but for now, I have Andy Dalton, which is like watching Uwe Ball try to direct a video game movie. He's no Rob Latterman, but we're gonna be all right. We're going to be all right.
We're going to be all right. And you know who else is all right? Brian Matolis. Thank you for our music.
Hey, Eric Tate, you're all right, too. Thank you for our artwork.
And Riho, thank you.
Thank you, Riho.
You launching yourself off the top rope at Jamie Hayter sent my soul to heaven. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to know how our souls are being ascended to the proverbial heaven of pro wrestling or the MCU, because we're marks for both, you can follow us on Twitter at the Infinity Pod 1. We're the #1 Infinity podcast.
Yeah, and if you want to be a mark for visual imagery, follow us on Instagram at the Infinity Pod.
And jump into that Discord. We may have to start a wrestling channel at this point.
I asked the mods. Actually, hold on. I asked the mods if I should make an AEW channel or if sports would be enough. Let's see what they said.
We're going to find out. Finding out on the air. Wait for it.
We're going to keep it in sports. So
we're keeping it in
sports channel.
Jordan Sports Channel.
Drop your AEW takes. Who do you love? Who do you hate? Who do you love to hate?
Ooh.
MJF.
Yeah, and a general question for the discourse. Here we go. Which MCU hero would you want to see take a heel turn next?